Jason Caldwell joins us, 247 Sports, covering the Auburn Tigers, and he joins us on 365 Sports. So obviously we know they open up on the last, Friday night against Baylor to open up the year. Jason, thanks for your time. What are the expectations for Hugh Freeze and Auburn this year?
Yeah, I think the expectations are that this is a team that you should see take some strides in year three. Hugh Freeze took over an Auburn program that had been pretty decimated. A couple of coaching changes, lack of recruiting, especially on the offensive line, had really hurt the roster a whole lot. And so really year one was just trying to survive. Year two last year, they had some young guys, some transfers, and they were a couple of plays away from probably should have been a 7, maybe 8 win team. Of course, you have a couple of those where you could have lost some games too, but I think you look now in year three for them, it feels like a roster that's set up to be, give you a better product than maybe they had in year one and year two.
What do you think of Jakcson Arnold and him fitting into that system? He didn't seem to fit in Oklahoma. Of course, they had a lot of other issues, but what is it about his skill set that works with Hugh Freeze's offense? Because quarterback has been the black hole so far in his first 2 years.
Yeah, and part of that I think has been a combination of things. Year one, wide receiver group just wasn't very good, and so you had that along with an offensive line that was just kind of a patchwork group, and that was some tough going for Peyton Thorne. Last year, you added a couple of receivers, but offensive line wise, still wasn't great. And so, but I think you look at Jakcson Arnold, and I think it's decision making and quick decision making is the thing I think they're looking for. I think the anticipating throws and kind of feeling out those kind of things. I think that's what they were most excited about in the spring. So I think that's part of it. He's a guy that can run. I've seen him make plays with his legs at times. I don't think they're counting on him to be 1,000-yard rusher, but I think they're counting on him to be able to be a guy that can make some plays with his legs. But I think this is about getting the ball in the hands of the wide receiver group that I think has a chance to be one of the best in the country. When you look at, obviously Cam Coleman coming back and Malcolm Simmons, and then you add in Eric Singleton from Georgia Tech and some young guys that have a chance to take a step forward. I think this is a group that has a legitimate chance to be special. And so if Jakcson Arnold's a guy that can get him the football, then I think you start talking about an offense that has a chance to do some pretty good things.
Jason, we're still 6 weeks away, so it's kind of too early to start getting too revved up now. But what's kind of the early chatter and anticipation of that first week, that trip to Waco to take on Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears?
I honestly think like most people now, there's so much unknown because rosters are so different. 15 years ago, you'd had a pretty good idea what both teams were going to be like based on who was returning and who you signed. Now, because of the portal, because of newcomers, because it's hard to really get a feel for teams, especially early in the year. I think you look at it, you know what you got. You know you're going to have face one of the best quarterbacks you're going to see all year. So I think that's part of it. Dave Aranda's a defensive guy, so he'll be kind of amped up for this game too. So I think you're looking at, I think for folks, they've really had a pretty good turnout for these road games. Some of these places that you don't get to see very much. And so I think for Auburn folks, this is going to be, there's usually a game where you go, hey, pick a road trip to go to. I think Baylor's going to be one of the opportunities to do that. Now, moving it to Friday night has an impact. I think it's going to impact this game in terms of travel for some folks, but I still think this is going to be a game that people are going to be excited about.
Jason, I try to keep up a little bit with Auburn, like everybody in college football, but I saw a couple of notes about the recruiting seems to be lagging behind right now. I'm not sure if that's the case because I don't follow Auburn recruiting that heavily, but is it?
That's far.
So much forgiveness. Wait, did you say forgiveness like far or forgiveness like forgiveness? Forgiveness. Forgiveness. Forgiveness.
I'm hearing far.
Forgiveness. Like forgiveness. Forgiveness? Forgiveness.
I'm still hearing far, but whatever.
Introducing Stealth 2 with more carbon for more forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Just hit it.
TaylorMade Golf.
Yeah. From a number standpoint, Auburn's in the 80s right now, which is not where you would expect them to be. And they have kind of approached things a little differently than some folks. Obviously, being in Texas, school like Texas Tech has approached things a little differently. They're still going out and hey, hammering down on the NIL side of things and doing some of that stuff. Auburn has gone and said, look, here's what we believe this thing's going to work, the revenue sharing side of things. Here's your budget. You got to have legitimate NIL deals to go along with that. And so they're not spending a ton of money on a recruiting class at the moment. Come August 1st, when these deals have to be made official, will that change? And if it does, will it change things for Auburn? Probably a little bit. I think as much as anything right now, you go in year 3, if you go out and win games and you show that, hey, what we've been telling you for 2 years is what we're going to put on the field, then I think it helps a little in recruiting as well. But this is a roster that is really heavy freshmen and sophomores. So this was always going to be a smaller class. I think the last time I counted, there were 13 seniors that are scholarship guys on this roster. Now you have some juniors that'll be draft eligible guys, but you're talking about probably only losing 15, 16 guys off a roster this year. Now you have some transfers. So this is going to be a smaller class anyway, but Auburn is playing it conservative with the unknown of the revenue sharing and some of that stuff. And right now it's not paying off, for them at the moment.
I saw, and of course, this is probably one of those Alabama hit pieces, but fan kind of things. How much golf does Hugh Freeze play?
He plays a pretty good bit, but he doesn't do anything else. There's a lot of coaches that go to the beach and go to the lake and do all that stuff. He chooses to play golf, and so in the end, it's one of those things where I don't know that I ever saw a story written about Steve Spurrier. He won a bunch of games, and he played as much golf as any football coach probably in the history of this sport. Yeah, it didn't matter because he won a bunch of games, and so they'll be the same thing here. If Hugh Freeze wins 10 games this year, everybody's going to say, hey, that's a pretty good idea to go play golf and to get away for a little while. If you don't, then people are going to go, well, you played too much golf. So it'll show up whether you win games or not. But, the thing is that, there's a time to get away in the springtime now, because head coaches, you're not allowed evaluation periods anymore. And so there's a lot of dead times for these guys, only a certain amount of practices you have for the spring. And so for him, his getaway is to go to the golf course and play. And he plays some, but again, there's probably a bunch of coaches that do a whole lot of other things outside the office as well.
I saw, in fact, it was funny that Paul brought that up, because today, I believe, I'm not sure who put it up there, maybe Hugh Freeze, Lane Kiffin responded. It was out in front of like a country club entrance with a big trophy that he and 6 or 7 other guys just won some kind of Ryder Cup format. But that's just one of those. I think people take it a little bit of a pot shot. Back to Jakcson Arnold. If he's not the answer, what's next?
Yeah, they brought in a couple of really talented newcomers as well. Deuce Knight is one of the top quarterbacks in the country, and I know I'm going to say this, and there'll be some folks in the state of Texas that probably fall over, but he really reminds me a lot of Vince Young in terms of his body style, the way he moves, and he's a left-hander, but he has some of those qualities, and so that's a guy that's kind of waiting in the wings as a true freshman. And Ashton Daniels is a transfer from Stanford that started for them the last couple of years and comes in as a guy that can really run, big athletic guy. And so they've got some options there, but obviously Jakcson Arnold, I think, is the guy that you look at coming out of the spring that you feel like, hey, that's the guy that will probably have the keys to this. Now, I think he still has to go out and show it in the preseason, but you look at it and all the things you want to do in this, because of your wide receivers, because of the things you do, the passing game has to be a really big part of things for this team to be successful.
How much is there legit pressure on Hugh Freeze for this year? Do you think that is legit, or is that maybe historical? The Auburn elites are a little less patient than most.
Yeah, I don't know that Auburn's any less patient than anybody else is nowadays. Yeah. You spend money and you go and make coaching changes. It's funny because outside of 2 guys, Alabama's changed coaches a lot more than Auburn has. But when one of them's Bear Bryant and when one of them's Nick Saban, you don't have to change very often. And so I think you look at it, and I think it's natural now when you make money and when there's money being spent. The expectations are that you need to go out and win. The problem is that it's never been more difficult in any sport than right now to win in the Southeastern Conference. When you look at, you bring in, Texas and Oklahoma, and you already brought in Texas A&M and these others. You look at this league right now, and no matter what sport you suit up in, it's about as difficult as it gets. And so when you look at Auburn too, when you throw in that your two natural rivals are Alabama and Georgia, that means you're in a pretty tough spot. Because, I mean, you look at this country in the last 15 years in college football, and you got Ohio State you throw in there and a couple other schools that are in the mix, but Alabama and Georgia have been the two most successful teams that you've had, and Auburn's had to play those every year and will forever unless something really drastically changes. And so because of that, that makes this year a little different for me because you get both of them at home. And so this is the year you think about if you're going to make some hay, you need to beat one of those teams and you get both of them at home.
Is that also a reason, I don't know what Freeze's stance is, or Auburn fans of the school, about not adding a ninth conference game? Because they're two every year they're playing Alabama, Georgia, where some every year might be Mississippi State, South Carolina. And I know South Carolina is on the up, but they just happen to have the wrong algorithm.
Yeah, it definitely has an impact. And that's the thing, scheduling, because when you get 16 team scheduling is going to have such a dramatic impact on a season anyway. And so you look at it and if it's one of those years where you run into having Georgia and Alabama already on the schedule and say you look up and you got Florida, Tennessee, or Florida and LSU as your others, then you start talking about, the schedule difficulty. I think, for Auburn, they're like, hey, we're willing to do whatever we need to do. They schedule some non-conference games, obviously Baylor and some of these other ones. I think it really is going to come down to how this playoff thing starts to work in the future. And if you look up and you go, hey, you can have a third loss or maybe a fourth loss and still make the playoffs, but that extra data point really matters, then I think we're going to see this league expand somewhat, but it may be this play-in game at the end of the year instead of a natural SEC championship game or something. But I think you'll see pretty much, at least the top teams try to get to that ninth game.
Can you try to describe what an Auburn booster donor is actually like and how, I guess, impatient they can actually be?
They're no different than anybody else. It's the biggest overblown thing in the history of the world.
Okay, good answer. Go ahead.
It is. I mean, it is. They've become this. It's become this cliche thing. It's not any different. They're all, when people give money, they get impatient when their money, it doesn't look like it works out. There's probably never been a time where Auburn boosters and donors have had less impact on a program than they did 40 years ago. It was probably much more. Now it's not nearly as much. And so, I don't, that's one of those things that has been a cliche thing for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I've been doing this for 27 years. They're not in. I see these people all over the league and all over the country. They're no different than anybody else.
Glad I asked then. I'm glad I asked. That's good.
Did it get maybe kicked into overdrive because the Brian Harsin thing was so abrupt and so kind of wild?
Yeah, well, it may have from a national perspective, but
yeah,
if you had boots on the ground and you saw what didn't happen, I mean, they weren't recruiting. And this is a different scenario, but they've recruited two really good classes the first couple of years. They weren't recruiting. He wasn't recruiting. And you knew that along with that, the fact that people were leaving the team, they had zero chance to win in the future. None. The roster that Hugh Freeze took over had one legitimate offensive tackle on the roster, and he's since transferred out because he just wasn't going to be good enough to play at this level. They did not recruit guys. And people saw that and went, look, I don't care what happens moving forward. You can coach football. You may be a good football coach, but when you don't recruit it in this league, you die. And I think people saw it for what it was and said, look, if we don't do something pretty quickly, then you're going to be 10 to 15 years before you have a team again.
Yeah, that's kind of like everybody says there's a Bigfoot, like, nah. And then all of a sudden, like, somebody shows you the blurry photo and you're like, well, okay, I guess there is.
Yeah,
so that's
absolutely.
Probably what kicked into that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there were signs and signs and signs. And you go, look, I don't need to see anything else. And I think the people saw it and went, that's not going to work at this level. And, it was unfortunate because that's the problem with the whole scenario, in my opinion, is that you had 2 years that basically you're like, 2 years of kind of flatlining. Well, when you flatline 2 years in the Southeastern Conference, then that really sets you back 4 or 5 or 6 years. And that's what Auburn has had the last couple of years.
How is and what is, you mentioned this could be one of the better travel games for Auburn other than their normal rivalries and teams they play in the SEC. But it is a Friday. You mentioned that could hurt the travel. What is the, I'm not saying anticipation, but Baylor, they finished strong last year. They had a horrible couple of years, but they did win the Sugar Bowl and beat Ole Miss at 21. They've been in and out, but finished strongly, and they're pretty talented, this team this year.
Yeah, no, I think people have those expectations and know this is going to be a difficult game. You look at not only what they did last year, but I mentioned quarterback coming back. You look at preseason and the Big 12, and Baylor's right there with a couple other teams as being preseason favorites. So I think people know how difficult this start is going to be for Auburn, and it kind of feels like Auburn is on a Big 12 road swing to open the season because out of the first 5 weeks of the season, Auburn has road trips to Baylor, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. So you feel like this is as Big 12 as it's going to ever get for an Auburn football team, but that's what they have to do. So there's, we got 3 road trips this year that'll be out in that direction, and back-to-back weeks at Oklahoma and Texas A&M later in the year. So I think difficult start, but I think for Auburn folks and I think people look at this game, you realize that this is going to be a team that knows from a Baylor standpoint. You get to play Auburn, you get to play an SEC team a Friday night. That's a big boost game when you start talking about dreams of maybe trying to make a playoff, and I think Auburn's in the same boat.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. The knowledge, the insight, the experiences. He even used that term, boots on the ground. He's there in Auburn, Alabama. The Tigers and Hugh Freeze, year 3 for him.